This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Kent, and I'm joining Chris Bean. Hello, Mr. Bean.
Hello, sir.
Let's talk about your conversation with Carter Hughes. Great to sit down and talk with Carter. It's very clear through talking with him and getting to learn more about him that his values are lined up with his goals, and he's taking steps to achieve those goals and reinforce those values. And great to hear the things that he's doing based on things he's passionate about and things that are really important for him. What did you think of your conversation with Carter?
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating that he was able to, from the Bible, the full works, able to parse out information to create a life framework. And I think the framework that he was able to derive from that was really helpful. And I can see how it would be very impactful for individuals to have that information and to design their life from that. Very good. Yes.
And one of the main things that he talked about throughout the episode, and even the other things he talked about that reinforced this idea was two things that he kind of stood on, which was define who you are, and then decide where you are going. And that again lines up with the idea of values and goals. And like you're saying, he's able to take one set of beliefs and make that the driving force, or make that something to help him become who he wanted to be after he decided who that was, and figure out where he's going.
Yeah, and kind of connected to that, he talked about, I think a little bit later on, he talked about roles and goals, which I thought is really similar to that, and also interesting. I haven't heard of that before, but defining the roles of your interaction, maybe it's husband, wife, maybe it's your role at work, whatever the role is that you're trying to be, and then what is your goal with that role. I think this is really lines up with what you're talking about with defining who you are, and then setting yourself on that path. Yeah, very, very interesting. And you're right. It's very clear that he has done that for himself. He has established those parameters, and then he is living a life that's in accordance with that. Yeah, very clear. Yes.
And as you said, drawing inspiration from the Bible, and taking words and finding out how to develop skills from those words, and then using that to help other people. There's 4 pillars on top of the 2 things you already mentioned that Carter kind of really works toward strengthening and making better. And those 4 pillars would be accountability, gratitude, courage, and discipline. And so hearing him break down some of those things and how they're really all connected, but how they each individually make a difference in our lives was really good to hear. And again, clearly, he's used resources, not just the Bible, but motivational speakers, education, coaches, inspiring people. He's used all these different things, all these words, all these tools to kind of put him on the path he's on, not only for himself, but now he's taken to the next level, and he's helping other people kind of strive and work on these different pillars as well.
Yeah, and of course, those 4 pillars, accountability, gratitude, discipline, and courage, I think are wildly helpful in almost everybody in any aspect of life. It doesn't matter what your job is, or if you even have a job. Being accountable, having courage, being grateful, and I forgot the last one. What's that? Accountable. Being accountable, gratitude, discipline, and then courage. I said in different order last time. Those are so helpful. And we, as we were talking with Carter, we talked about those things. And accountability. One thing he talked about from accountability from the Genesis story, from Adam and Eve, was being able to accept the things that you can do and that you can't do, and really how that relates to your role and what that plays for as your role. If you tell your boss, hey, yeah, I can do that, no problem, just because you feel like you should be able to, or you said at some point that you could do it, and now you have that on your desk and you have no idea how to do that, it's going to be really difficult to ask for help at that point. So being able to be accountable for yourself and say, yeah, I don't actually know how to do this. Take responsibility for that, and then ask questions. Find out what you can do to further that. And then, of course, being grateful. We talked about grateful countless times on the podcast here before, but that is so helpful. Being grateful, and not just on a surface level. Being grateful, having a gratitude practice. Being even if it's you are on a mission each day to tell one person that you're thankful for them and the things that they did for you in your life, or telling somebody thank you one time, if that's the bare minimum that you do, that's fine. But what that starts to do is that will overflow, and that will move in your life and help you to have a mindset of being thankful despite whatever the things happen. Something bad might happen, but you are thankful for it because it opened another door that you didn't see later on. And maybe in that moment, you're not necessarily thankful for that it happened, that, oh man, whatever it is. But because this thing happened, it allowed you to move to the next thing and go through that open door that door that opened later on. And then, of course, courage, being able to have courage to step outside of your bounds, outside of your comfort zone, and do things that are not necessarily what you're comfortable with doing. That's kind of the default, definition of comfort zone, moving outside of your comfort zone. But of course, that takes courage. And if you stay in your comfort zone, okay, let's think about this. Your comfort zone, essentially, I like to think about this like your bed. Your bed in the morning, that alarm clock goes off, you hit the snooze, or you turn it off, you throw it against the wall, it crashes, whatever. But you stay in that nice, warm, comfortable bed. If that's your comfort zone, if your bed is your comfort zone and you never leave your bed, you can't do anything. Right? You just stay cuddled up underneath the pillows, like you're just stuck there. Okay, well, you can't move, you can't do anything. You have to have courage to get up and do something. So that courage is what it takes to step outside of that comfort zone. And of course, I think the underlying thing for all of those is discipline, because it takes discipline to do the accountability. It takes discipline to be grateful. It takes discipline to have the courage. And then that discipline is the underlying foundation for all of those in order to continue and move forward on that path.
And it's interesting that we're talking about the different pillars that Carter has developed and is working toward. And as you just broke down the four of those things, he got those from, as we had mentioned before, the Bible. And I think that it's an interesting lesson in itself that he's able to find the usefulness in the Bible, draw out those lessons, and then develop a course or a system or a plan to reinforce those pillars. And it goes to show that, he found the inspiration in the Bible. But if you're looking for usefulness in anything, you might be able to find usefulness in everything. So if you kind of approach things with this inquisitive mindset or this growth mindset, you really can find what you're looking for in a lot of different areas, and kind of using your words and using your knowledge of what these things are to extrapolate or pull out something good and beneficial is a wonderful skill to have. And I think if we tried to approach everything with that kind of mindset, I think everyone would be better off in many different ways, because we're choosing to look for the opportunities rather than for the obstacles, is something that Carter said as well. We're finding things that can benefit us rather than the things that are detrimental or things that are negative. And it goes back to conversations we've had in this podcast already, being someone who is trying to find the good in all the situations, trying to find what is the benefit of X, Y, or Z thing. And yet again, a great example of how beneficial that mindset can be for everyone.
Yeah, and as he was talking about these things, it's really interesting hearing them. He's using a little bit different terminology than what we have used here in the podcast before, but it's so cool hearing the guests that we've had talk about the concepts and ideas that we have discussed, handfuls of times before on the podcast, as in their own terms, in their own as their own usefulness, as their own perspective on those things that we've talked about before. So it's really refreshing to hear their take on those key concepts and ideas that we share frequently. That's very helpful, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think there's a concept that have not yet directly addressed, but maybe is kind of adjacent to things that we talk about. And you guys had a nice little conversation about this, but the idea of holding on to your dreams and protecting your passions. And specifically, we talked about that, how it relates to children, to youth, and to people that we have a direct influence over. So not only, as adults, or when we're trying to kind of redefine what our life is going to be like and what's important to us, but, at a young age, encouraging children or kids to embrace their passions, to follow their dreams, and really being conscious of avoiding of not letting those things fall to the wayside or being, pushed to the side so you can go out and get a quote unquote good job or normal job, but really leaning into and emphasizing and promoting the positive effect that the passion is going to have on your life, and leaning into what good can come from your passions and dreams, and how important it is to hold on to those and really nurture those in kids as well. And I think that, it's something that we think about kind of in passing as, oh yeah, we should encourage our kids to have dreams and passions, but really we act differently than we're thinking most of the time. And so again, just being conscious of that and acting according to that, and helping others, not only as adults, but also as children, to maintain their passions and continue to pursue their dreams.
Yeah, and you're right. That's interesting that we kind of dove into that a little bit further probably than we have previously. I think the interesting part about that is that's kind of near and dear to us because we work with kids. I have kids as well, but we work with kids in our job, as that's our main person that we're interacting with is children, the youth, the next generation. And we talked with Martin Schoendorfer about that. You have to be careful about what you say around the kids because they hear those things, they take that as fact. And then that was kind of reintroduced and established when we met with John James Santangelo, because he talked about anybody like the subconscious that is 8 years or younger, they hear the words in their subconscious and they assume whatever they hear is fact, and they move forward on that path, hearing those things as if they're true, and they hold true to themselves. And so when it comes to children and the youth, it's very important that we structure the information that we tell them with a very keen mindset behind it. And we're not telling them things offhanded or on shorthand, but we need to fully invest into the children, because the children are the next generation. And someday in age, I'm going to be old and decrepit, and my children are going to have to take care of me. And hopefully I did a good job of raising them so that they do that job appropriately. I hope.
We talked a little bit about having a gratitude journal, not in so many words, but the practice of that pillar of gratitude, and thinking about things that are you're grateful for, and writing down things or people that are impactful or grateful in your life is a practice that Carter follows. And beyond that, he talks specifically about thanking and conversing with your family members, thanking them for things that they do for you, or things that they have done for you, or maybe just for who they are and the presence they have in your life. But then also, being intentional in having conversations with not only your family members, I think, but family members, friends, and we'll talk a little bit later about even coworkers too, but developing relationships with them and finding out more about them and what's important to them and things that they want ties into, like we just talked about, encouraging passions and pursuing dreams. But then also it helps you to understand that person and be more grateful for them on a different level. And so, it's great to hear him talk about the practice of gratitude and the importance of that as he's found it, because it's something that we think is important as well.
Yeah. So what I thought was really interesting was the person aspect of that. And in my own gratitude, I think about events that I'm thankful for, or opportunities that maybe weren't that I wasn't so thankful for in the moment, that I can reflect and be thankful for later on. But that's an interesting perspective to bring people in, because of course we need to be thankful for the people that we have in our life, and moreover than maybe just writing it down, he expresses the benefit of actually telling those people, hey, I'm thankful for you being in my life and the things that you have done for me, and that I'm thank you for being here with me and enjoying this journey that we're on together. That is, I think, wild and not something that I have thought about before, but I think that it would have profound benefit for anybody that could actually tell somebody physically thank you to them, and tell them, moreover, thank you, but tell them how thankful, not thank you, but thankful you are for them to be in your life. And yeah, wild, very helpful.
And the reason that we're even here talking about any of this stuff is another thing that Carter believes is important is simplifying and explaining what's going on to help others. And like we talked about, one of his goals, one of his missions is to use everything that he's learned, everything he's interacted with, to help other people. He's not just taking it in for himself, which can be important, but his goal is to take all those things, simplify it, and then he can help a bunch of other people with it as well as he's already doing now. And that idea of simplifying and then explaining is huge on any level. If things are complicated, and as we talked about before, things are complicated and hard to interact with, that discourages people from actually trying to put the effort forth to think about them or interact with them, because it's difficult, it's hard, it's not easy to do. And so if you can simplify it, it's a lot easier for you to be able to put that information in the path of other people and help them learn from it, which is something that Carter is working toward. We talked about creativity and self-esteem. And again, it goes back into the idea of defining who you are and deciding where you're going, defining your identity and then kind of refining that. And it also ties back into talking about, the passions and dreams of children. If we can nurture their creativity and help tie that into their self-esteem and continue to make that a part of their life, it's going to be huge, because those are two things that we as people are reliant upon: being creative and having a high self-esteem. And if we don't stress the importance of that, or don't encourage that, or don't nurture that, it's going to be detrimental for us and for anybody else too.
Yeah, and all of that is really interesting. And the way that I have thought about that kind of concept before, the creativity, is we have whatever information you have, kind of kicking around in your brain. When you intake new information, you have an opportunity to link that new information with the old information that you already have stored in your head. And from those connections, the old information with the new information, I think, is where creativity stems from. Because that old information, you're hanging out in there. Maybe it's stored in a back file cabinet for something. And then the new information, you're like, oh yeah, I remember this other thing. Oh, that connects like this. And then you have that idea. And that old information with the new information, I think, is really helpful. The problem that I see is we have this old information, but not very many people are taking in new information. And because there's no new information coming in, that chance of connecting old with new and then having that new creative idea is gone, because that new information isn't there. Or they're putting the old information in one filing cabinet and then the new information in another filing cabinet, and they're keeping them separate from each other. But really, in my eyes, that connection of old information with new information is where the creativity has come from, at least for myself. And if it seems like very well that Carter is on the path to doing that. He has the old information. The Bible essentially is one of the oldest books that we have, if not the oldest. And he's taking the key concepts from that very old book, creating new things from them because of other things that he's intaked and heard from other people sharing their thoughts and ideas and opinions. And then he created something new from that. And he's furthering that journey for other people by then sharing his creative aspect, his creative insights on that information with others so that they can continue and do the same thing. Again, taking that old information, linking it with the new information, and then creating something brand new.
Yeah, and speaking of creating something brand new, the last thing we can talk about is the Carter Hughes Knowledge Institute and what he's doing there. The three things he's focusing on: self-improvement, career improvement, and then veteran benefits. Being a veteran himself, he's very invested in the importance of taking care of our own veterans. And this is where we talk about work, and part of that is of your career improvement is knowing your job, knowing your coworkers, and then being able to be willing to do public speaking. Those are three things that are important toward your career improvement, which we stressed or talked about a little bit there. And great information, great insights there. And that's just the surface of what he's doing with the Carter Hughes Knowledge Institute. It seems like something that we could all benefit from, and great to hear that he's out there doing the work, simplifying that information, and then putting it in the hands of other people to help them learn and grow in those three different areas.
Yeah, and I had to chuckle. I really did, because he talked about that triangle where for in order to improve in your job, where you should know your job well enough that you can explain it to a child. Okay, yeah, right. Common sense would tell you that you should be able to do that. And then the next thing is that you have a good relationship with your coworkers. You can actually talk to them and communicate with them freely. Those two things, I think, are common sense for most people, but they're not commonly found. And we talked a little bit on the show about this with Carter, is that first one, being able to understand your job so that you can explain it to a child. That is tough sometimes, not necessarily for the individual or because of the individual, but because of the organization, because the organization is filling these roles, quote unquote roles. They're putting butts in seats, but the problem is that person that's in that seat doesn't necessarily know what their role is, because the person that hired them doesn't know what their role is, because the organization doesn't actually know what that person's supposed to be doing. And because of that disconnect, it can be tough for you, listener, to have your job and being able to explain your job in such a way that you can explain it to a child. Because sometimes you go to work and you do this thing, and you go to work and you do that thing, and then you do this thing, and you're running in all kinds of different directions. You never know what's going to happen until you get there. That's tough. That's really tough for that individual. And again, part of that is maybe individualistic, where you can ask clarification on that, or maybe understand your job a little bit better so that you can explain it to a kid. But part of it probably is going to be asking, hey, what actually are the roles that I need to fill here? What is my job description? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And of course, that takes accountability. Going back earlier on there, it takes accountability to be able to ask that. And courage, of course, as well, because that's a little bit outside your comfort zone, because that's kind of admitting that you don't necessarily know what you're supposed to be doing, which is kind of by default the way that the organizations are working nowadays. And then, of course, the next part of the triangle there was to interact with your coworkers. You have to interact with the people that you work with. If you go to work and you dislike everybody that you're there with, you don't want to look at them, you don't want to talk to them, you hope that they never say or do anything to you, that's troublesome. That's worrisome. You have to, like Carter talked about this, you spend many more hours at your work than you do at home. Right? You get up in the morning, where do you go? You go to work. You come home from work, you eat dinner, you maybe interact with your family a little bit, you go to bed, you go back the next day, you do the same thing. You are at work for a large portion of your life. And if you are disliking all the people that you're there with, if you're disliking what you're actually doing, or you don't know, you're confused on what you're supposed to be doing in any day, maybe start asking some questions, right? And those two things, again, I thought were comical, kind of on surface level. And maybe it's the way that he shared it. And maybe it's just the nature of those things, right? Be able to understand your job well enough that you can explain it to a child. When you go to work, interact with those people like the people that you're there with. And then the last part really is kind of the connection between those first two, is being able to be outspoken about your job, right? Publicly speaking about your job, whether that's you're leading meetings, you're advocating for your job on social media, or you're out talking in the community about the different things that you're doing, depending on what your job actually is. But those three things, if you can work on those three things, I think any job that you're doing, if you can understand it well enough that you can explain it to a child, interact with the people that you're working with in a loving and maybe not loving, in a caring way, have a good relationship with those people, and then be outspoken about your job, being passionate enough to tell other people about what you're up to, I think are key advancement metrics to check in on.
Make sure you follow us on social media. You can find the podcast at Prestigious Pod.
You can find me, Chris Bean, at Chris Bean Official.
You can find me, Mr. Kent, at Mr. Chris R. Kent.
And if you like our content and would like to subscribe to our email, you can do that via our social media or on the website.
Make sure you also join our Discord for exclusive content and personal interactions.
If you would like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life by me, Chris Bean, you can do that by reaching out on one of my social medias, or by emailing the podcast at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com.
Those are the points. Make sure you come back next week for even more points and another great conversation. Until next time, I'm Chris Kent.
And I'm Chris Bean.